Welcome, everyone. Order, please. We are going to begin our 7th meeting of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Today with us, in the context of our study of Supplementary Estimates B, we welcome as witnesses from the Department of Public Works and Government Services several representatives, namely Madame Michelle Doré, Deputy Minister, Receiver General of Canada, accompanied by Nancy Chawan, Assistant Deputy Minister, Parliamentary Precinct Branch, as well as Pierre-Marc Mongeau, Assistant Deputy Minister, Real Property Branch, and Alex Lacronie, Chief Financial Officer, Finance. And finally, Pablo Sobrino, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Acquisitions Branch. Thank you all for your presence here. For this first part of our meeting, I will allow you 10 minutes for your presentation, after which committee members will have questions for you pertaining to your presentation on SUPS B. Without further ado, thank you. And you have the floor, Madame Doré. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm pleased to appear before this committee on behalf of Public Works and Government Services to discuss the 2014 Supplementary Estimates B, as well as the Departmental Performance Report for 2012-2013. You introduced those who have accompanied me today, so I won't repeat what you've said. Thank you for allowing us to finish by 5 p.m. because we have a celebration this afternoon at the end of the day for our charity campaign in the workplace. It is the opportunity for us to celebrate the end of the government portion of this campaign, and the employees of Public Works have raised more than $1 million for the National Capital Region, and we wish to celebrate this contribution. So for those committee members who may be unfamiliar with our department, we play a key role in the operations of the federal government. We can say that we are at one and the same time its treasurer, accountant, real property manager, central purchasing agent, and linguistic authority, among other things. We are home to the Receiver General, managing a cash flow of more than $2.2 trillion a year. And we also prepare the annual public accounts of Canada. For the 5th consecutive year, we have had an audit without any changes, which is without precedent for government administrations of our size. We also accommodate more than 272,200 federal employees in a diverse real estate portfolio involving over 2,000 leases with $1 billion in annual rental payments. We're responsible for more than 60,000 contracts worth 83% of the $21 billion a year that the Government of Canada spends on acquisitions. And we translate more than 1 million pages of text a year on behalf of federal organizations. We provide translation and interpretation services to Parliament. The people in the booth at present are examples of this,
which is to deliver high-quality central programs and services that ensure sound stewardship on behalf of Canadians and meet the program needs of federal institutions. In everything we do, we put a great importance on integrity. In July 2012, the Department introduced new integrity measures which render potential bidders ineligible if they have been convicted of certain offences. Since then, Public Works has verified around 43,000 contracts and real property transactions involving checks on almost 145,000 individuals, companies, and their board members. Through the 2013-2014 main estimates, the Department asked for $2.6 billion to deliver core services related to accommodation, renovations, construction, procurement, translation, and industrial security screening. We did not seek any appropriations through the earlier Supplementary Estimates A, and in this time frame, we are seeking $176.6 million in these Supplementary Estimates B. This request includes $69.7 million for real property functions to cover non-discretionary costs and fit-up, payments in lieu of taxes and municipal taxes associated with Crown-owned buildings and leased space. $38.4 million of this is for the fit-up for 3 new federal government buildings in Gatineau, which will consolidate a number of departments and reduce our need to lease space. Another $25 million is for office accommodation for departments and agencies, delivering programs related to, for example, agriculture and border security. These office accommodation requirements flow directly from the funding requests made by departments and agencies for new or renewed programs. The next amount is $37.4 million for the pay modernization project to continue the planned work on system design and configuration and for the implementation of the new service model. We are also requesting $31.5 million to improve federal engineering assets such as dams, bridges, and crossings, including, for example, the Chaudière Crossing and the Témiscamingue Dam Complex. $13.7 million is for the reinvestment of revenues from the sale or transfer of surplus properties, which were sold at market value between December 1, 2012 and July 8, 2013. The funds generated from these sales are to be reinvested in federal office facilities and common use assets to preserve or extend their useful life. And $3.4 million is requested for the rehabilitation and reconstruction of the manège militaire sur la Grande Allée in Quebec City that was damaged by fire in 2008. Selon ce budget supplémentaire des dépenses.
With these supplementary estimates B, our total gross budget would become $6.2 billion, broken down as follows. $2.5 billion for the rent, fit-up, and utilities of government-wide accommodation, Receiver General and Central Compensation Administration functions, and translation services to Parliament. $1.9 billion related to the provision of optional services to departments such as real property project management and translation services on a cost recovery basis. $945 million to deliver core programs such as central purchasing and banking, public accounts, payroll and pension services, and $708 million for Government of Canada buildings and infrastructure. As Public Works generates $3.3 billion in revenues for client departments, or 53% of its budget, we need a net appropriation of $2.9 billion. Allow me now to turn to our departmental performance report for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2013.
Public Works and Government Services Canada has put considerable energy into innovation, cost savings, and making it easier for government clients and Canadians to do business with us. The department's top organizational priorities for 2012-13 were and continue to be delivering efficient and effective services, transforming critical infrastructure, and ensuring sound stewardship and management excellence. To deliver on our first priority, the department has adopted a smart procurement approach that leverages digital technology to reduce costs and process for clients and potential bidders. More importantly, this approach has led to enhanced engagement with suppliers. We engage with industry earlier and more often throughout our procurement processes. We make greater use of independent third-party advice and fairness monitors in complex procurements. And we apply robust governance to ensure continuous oversight. It is this approach that the Auditor General recognized in his chapter on shipbuilding in his report that was released earlier this week. Our Office of Small and Medium Enterprises, OSME, helps demystify the government procurement process for businesses and manages our successful Build in Canada innovation program, which links federal clients and private sector innovators. We also successfully modernized the government's pension administration system and business processes. The new system, serving about 600,000 users, which is the biggest in Canada, was launched successfully in January 2013. Last night, the Information Technology Association of Canada, ITAC, awarded the project its first prize for large public sector IT projects and actually created a special prize to recognize this particular project for its delivery on scope, on time, and on budget. Pour respecter sa deuxième priorité,
In respect of its second priority, which is transforming critical infrastructure, the department made significant progress on its state-of-the-art real estate or real property information technology system. And as you heard from departmental officials who appeared before you last week, work on the parliamentary precinct is unfolding as set out in the long-term vision and plan. In our effort to ensure sound stewardship and management excellence, our third priority, the department met its savings goals in 2012-2013 and strengthened its financial management through measures such as budget management excellence and renewed financial and material management system. In addition, the transition to direct deposit at the Receiver General for Canada is on track and will save an estimated $17.4 million a year when it's completed in 2016. As you can see, we have entrusted, or rather Public Works has been entrusted with a broad mandate and manages significant sums of money. In providing other departments with a wide range of common services, we enable them to focus on their own mandates and priorities. As befits our stewardship responsibility, we seek whole-of-government solutions that are both effective and cost-effective while striving to deliver high-quality services to Canadians. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your attention.
Merci à vous pour cette présentation. Donc, sans plus tarder,
Thank you for this presentation. Without further
poser leurs questions, commençant par Anne-Marie D. pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being present before us. And we'll tackle these issues. It's a hefty program, very voluminous, very heavy in that sense. The number of employees that you have, we know that there is a reduction in the number of full-time staff. It is to move from 12,229 to 11,679 in 2012-2013. Could you tell us what programs will be the most affected by this reduction in staff? Thank you for the question. When Shared Services Canada was created in 2011, the transfers for human resources were transferred and reflected in our books in 2012-2013. So part of the staff reduction that you see is the reflection of the transfer of our employees to Shared Services Canada. So it's not just reductions for savings purposes. It is due in great part to the transfer of employees to Shared Services Canada. And there also are reductions that were made for savings under strategic examination programs, and most of them were for programs for which we decided that they would end, or else positions were not filled after people retired. Second question. $114.4 million are provided for 2014-15, and it goes from 46 and some billion dollars for 2010-2011 for program expenditures for pensions and payroll. If there's a reduction in staff, what justifies this increase? In essence, it is for the payroll project. We are transforming this project, the pay system that's 40 years old, more than 40 years old, and the increase is due to that, to the project. And the project involves two elements. First of all, the system itself, which is being renewed. In other words, the computerized system. We are in that phase. We're finalizing that phase now, the planning of the system itself. And the second element is the consolidation of the pay functions. In other words, the processing of the services housed in each of the departments. The service now is consolidated in one place under Public Works. Thank you. I'll move on to a complementary question now. I believe that employees now receive their pay directly at home. But this isn't subcontracted, or is it? No, it's not subcontracted. These are direct deposits to their accounts. Very well, thank you. Another question now.
Si on regarde au niveau du côté des immeubles, il y a 38,4 millions de dollars au crédit 1B pour des dépenses obligatoires surtout pour des travaux d'aménagement relativement à des immeubles appartenant à l'État ou loués. Avec une baisse de personnel et un transfert de personnel dans les services partagés, comment on peut expliquer qu'on a une augmentation au niveau des immeubles?
Ce montant-là, Monsieur le Président,
this amount is due to the necessary amounts. We purchased 3 buildings so as to be able to consolidate staff, and this also is part of our commitment that we made to ensure a balance between the Quebec side and the Ontario side, Ottawa-Gatineau. So we purchased or built 3 buildings, and this amount is required to fit them up. In this case, we will move and consolidate staff from various departments, which will allow us to relinquish leases and make savings. So it's not an increase proper in our staff. It's the investment that we're making to be able to further consolidate and put an end to leases we have throughout the region. So it's going to cost more money to make these cuts. What it represents is an investment to be able to make savings and save and reduce long term. Yes, it's not to cut, it is to, in fact, reduce the amounts and the expenditures that we must make based on existing leases. And we're going to be making savings as of what year? I will turn to my colleague for that. Bernard. Yes, thank you for your question. The 3 buildings for which we've established this, we've consolidated several departments within those buildings housed in them, and several departments did in fact greatly reduce the square footage that they use. So when we talk about consolidation, we're also talking about reducing the space occupied, and it's based on that reduction in spaces occupied that we can calculate the savings we'll be able to make during the coming years. So we estimate at present that we'll be making savings for the leases and the rental by moving. We have about an average of $3 million per year in savings. And if you calculate the investment, but over 8 to 10 years, we'll be able to recoup our investment. And I should mention, however, that these are buildings that we will retain, and the occupants will stay there over a 25-year period. So our savings will begin as of the 8th or 10th year, depending on the building. So this is major, and for us, it is much more important to have a reduction long-term of the rental costs. That's where we make these reductions based on what we are moving about. Thank you. Your time is up. Mr. Trottier, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Government Operations Committee once again. In your remarks, you talked about the Building Canada Innovation Program, which is of interest to this committee. We did a study 2 years ago, but in those days it was called the Canadian Innovation, the CICP, the Canadian Innovation Commercialization Program. And this program was really designed to help smaller businesses deal with the federal government, to give a leg up. Could you talk about some of the progress that's been made in the last 2 years with this program, from its original inception as the CICP to its current incarnation?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll speak briefly as an introduction and turn to my colleague, Mr. Sobrino, who is responsible for was responsible for the pilot, and now its current permanent manifestation. The program is essentially designed to provide, it's a procurement program. So the federal government, through this program, actually purchases the services or products that companies provide in order to meet the need expressed by a government department, a program, or an activity. So it is a competitive procurement process. Needs are identified by departments, and the selected products and services are matched with the departments and their needs. And the payments are made as if essentially because we are buying a service or product. By giving companies a first leg up, often it's kind of their first big sale, and so that they can say they have sold to the Government of Canada, it then allows them to market that product and that service to other clients, both in Canada and abroad. Maybe, Pablo, you can give us an overview of the number of projects and the types, if that's okay.
So thank you, Deputy. So thanks for the question. Maybe just to give a little summary, as of last March, we had 61 contracts that had been signed with different innovators across Canada, and for goods and mostly goods and some services up to a value of almost $500,000. They range from as little as $30,000 up to almost $500,000. We've gone forward. The government announced the extension to the Built in Canada Innovation Program, and it is a bit of an evolution of the program. And one of the things we discovered as we were managing this program was that there is a lot of interest in innovation in the defense industry space, and those innovations tend to require a little bit more investment. And so we're looking at a program that actually is part of the money will be set aside for military innovations, working with the Department of National Defense and the Defense Research Establishment to identify products that would be of use and worthy of investigating through the needs of defense. The interesting thing about the program and its success so far, and it's largely anecdotal at this point because we have to get enough products out to market, is those products that manage to make that first buyer piece and use that in their promotion of their own business are able to sell abroad. And that's generally the pressure that we receive from small businesses, is that here we have, they've invested in R&D, et cetera, but they need to make the first sale before they can actually commercialize that product. And I believe when I've spoke with the committee previously on this, we've had a lot of success in those companies actually getting that product out to market. We can say now that a number of companies actually have incredibly good sales internationally based on the fact that they were able to sell to the Government of Canada. And that was one of the big pieces that in our cross-country consultations, is that small businesses want to have the government buy their things. And so this approach allows them to compete, demonstrate that they're top of class, and have a government department test and help them finalize their products so it can go into a commercial market.
Thank you. Now, outside of the innovation program, there's some other means. I know that the Public Works Department has put some measures in place to make it easier for small businesses to do business with the federal government. Things like buyandsell.com, things like the procurement ombudsman. I know those have been successful. I've talked to some small business people in my own riding and some stakeholders, and they've talked about how they've successfully gained some contracts with the federal government. But one of their criticisms is that the federal government is actually the worst payer. It's really hard to get paid by the federal government at times compared to other entities that they deal with. And I don't see any measures or metrics, and I suppose that's good for the taxpayer, I suppose, and good for the Treasury to squeeze small businesses, but ultimately it's not good for the small businesses. And some of them have to, lever up so they can finance doing business with the federal government. Is there anything Public Works is doing to make the federal government a better payer, especially for smaller businesses?
Le temps est écoulé, mais je vais vous laisser quand même.
Time is up, but I'll allow you to answer.
There are some metrics for us. In fact, the Treasury Board Secretariat has a very precise metrics of the number of days that it actually takes us to pay. And I have to say that at Public Works, we actually meet the metric. It does happen that other government departments do not, because we are not the only ones who procure. So we do work with other organizations. It is a comment. I also meet with small business, and it is often a comment that I hear. And in fact, when I actually get those comments and I look and try to find out what's happened, more often than not, it's another department. So by asking us and by creating the opportunity through OSME, the Office of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, it gives businesses an opportunity for a place to go and ask the question.
Merci pour cette réponse. Alors...
Thank you for that answer. Mr. Blanchet, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our guests. It's always a pleasure to welcome you here before the committee. My first question pertains to the Manège Militaire in Quebec City. You're investing $3.4 million this year. It had been announced that you would have a program of $104 million, $11 million for public consultation. Since you're asking for monies, you most certainly have a schedule. What does the amount correspond to, and what can we expect in the future? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. The amount requested in supplementary estimates is really for the definition phase of the project. We are at present having discussions with the various departments, with the City of Quebec and the Commission des Champs de Bataille, who are housed there, and we're looking at the buildings and the grounds, doing an analysis of this. So the idea is really to finish that work. That's what we're asking for the funding. Yes, I'm coming to the schedule of work. Our objective is to be able to grant the building contracts and begin the work early 2015 to be able to have begun the occupation of the buildings in 2017. Excellent. Thank you very much. Earlier, my colleague talked about the Miramichi consolidation project. Over the course of time, we know that it's interdepartmental consolidation. We know that you're using new software. I think it's Microsoft, if I'm not mistaken. I would like to know, or PeopleSoft, between 2011, or rather 2014, between now and 2014-15, it's going to triple virtually. And I would like to know, based on the present cost, how do we compare with what's happening? The amounts that are provided for in the supplementary estimates and the report on plans and priorities demonstrate the curve for the increase in costs based on the project to bring the pay system up to the level it should be at, and to consolidate the human resources, the people who will be working on this, and offer the services, the pay services. So it's the pay officers who are being consolidated. The curve for the expenditures will, because it's expenditures that are committed to bring it up to the required level, finalize it, put it in place, and finalize the training and hiring of the people we'll need to offer these services. So the curve will drop off once it's finished, this project. And when will that be done? 15, 16, and we begin to save money in 16, 17, because there are savings that tie into that as well, about $78 million. You also have $31.5 million for dams, bridges, etc. What are you doing exactly with that, with those monies? Perhaps you could give us a quick overview of the infrastructure that is involved here. Thank you for the question. We have 19 assets of various types, with docks, bridges, dams, and even part of the Alaska Highway. Yes. It is a very diversified portfolio. What can I say? With regard to the amounts requested in supplementary estimates, one part will go to the Chaudière crossing, the Burlington Bridge, the Chaudière Dam, and the Pont des Allumettes, the des Allumettes Bridge. What are you going to do with regard to the Chaudière Bridge? I think that's for the dam, the crossing. It's not the bridge proper. For the Chaudière, yes, it's a crossing. That's how we call it, the Chaudière crossing. And it's mainly for health and safety, the work that's being envisaged here. And we want to begin, we want to improve the conditions, bring it up to green. If we have yellow, red, green, we want to bring it up to that level, and we want to finish this by 2014. What do you mean exactly by these conditions? Because of the situation, there are issues. I don't have all of the details of what's involved in health and safety, but the idea is to reinforce the structure. It's also the visual aspect, but we do want to reinforce the crossing to ensure that everything is covered with regard to health and safety. So it's maintenance, bridge maintenance, with all of the bridge maintenance activities that fall under us. So verification, when we find elements that aren't as solid as they should be, we ensure that they're repaired before there is any danger. Thank you for those questions, Mr. Blanchette. Mr. Cannon, for 5 minutes, please.
Chair and ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure having you as our witnesses again. We appreciate Public Works, and over the last couple of years, it's looking some positive steps and directions. And I just wanted to ask a few questions regarding the departmental performance report and the Auditor General's report this week, specifically around the shipbuilding procurement strategy. I was in Halifax the last couple of days with the International Trade Committee talking about the comprehensive economic trade agreement with CETA with the European Union, meeting with Atlantic stakeholders and business organizations. Toured a Halifax port yesterday, and the people are ecstatic of $115 billion mega projects. They had a tour of the Irving shipyards and great opportunities for the Atlantic, Canada, and all Canadians. And the Auditor General mentioned the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy. The shipyard selection process was successful and efficient, independent of political influence, consistent with government regulations and policies, and carried out in an open, transparent manner. And through the NSPS, the government is indeed managing the acquisition of military ships in a timely, affordable, efficient, and transparent manner that will support the shipbuilding industry for years to come. Just a couple of quotes from the Auditor General's report. Whoever is comfortable answering, I just want to know if maybe you could comment on the Auditor General's findings with respect to the shipbuilding procurement strategy and its oversight mechanisms, and specifically to his findings with respect to whether the NSPS is being well managed.
Thank you for the question. The quotes you read were the ones that I was going to use. We are actually quite, it is, I would say, highly unusual for an Auditor General's report to have so many positive elements and so many positive quotes. So we were quite happy, if anybody could be happy with an Auditor General's report. For us, it was an excellent report card. It demonstrated that the results of what I had mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, our approach to smart procurement, that it is worth taking the time and effort to engage early and frequently with industry, to be transparent about the iterations, the approach, the requirements that we have, but also, more importantly, to listen to what industry has to say, and for us to make the adjustments necessary to the procurement processes as we go forward. The other element that was absolutely essential was expertise, third-party experts that we retained in order to give us advice all the way through, both in terms of what a target state for the shipyard should be, what the fairness monitor that we hired should give us in terms of the assurance around the process, and assure the industry that we were following all of the process elements as we should, and that we take into account industry's comments. That we also had a very strong and robust governance structure, which continues to this day. It is at the top a committee of deputy ministers, which I chair, and then has quite an extensive set of committees to support all of the elements of the decision making. We have a very robust escalation mechanism so that no issue turns around and spins for any length of time. Decisions are made, and that we report regularly to ministers about the work and the progress that we make. The shipyards found the process quite comprehensive, and they too found the selection process as transparent and as effective as possible. We are now have issued contracts to the 2 selected shipyards, and we continue our ongoing engagement both with industry for the suppliers to the shipyards, as well as with the shipyards as we progress now for each one of the projects that are being undertaken for the construction of the ships.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you appreciated those comments as the Auditor General's quotes. I thought they were excellent, and somebody else that made an excellent quote is my honourable colleague across the way, Mr. Pat Martin, when he commented, "I think you can tell by the enthusiasm from the committee members that we're all as excited about this as a lot of Canadians are." And I think the credit goes to all of the actors. Perhaps it is a new standard in how we can make major procurements. So I was wondering if you think there's any lessons that we learn from shipbuilding strategic procurement, something the government hasn't necessarily had top marks in the past as far as our past procurement. So taking this strategy, this model, and applying it to future procurements?
We are, in fact, applying the model to quite a range of procurements. I would say not just the complex procurements, which are often in the military side, but also in terms of very complex procurements that may not have the same range or dollar value. So we are doing so, for example, right now with the fixed wing search and rescue, We've had extensive and continue to have extensive engagement with industry. In fact, we had a latest letter of interest that was issued to the companies on the evaluation process. So we follow now that process, that approach very consistently, and I would say aggressively, because it has in fact demonstrated and proven its worth in terms of the management of processes of procurements.
Proud to say my constituent Colonel Flightcraft's maintaining the search and rescue aircraft and giving them much longer lifetime so we can procure that in the future. So thank you very much.
Merci, M. Cannon. Donc, M. Byrne maintenant.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon.
Madam Deputy Minister, if you would provide us with the committee with some additional information about the new integrity measures for the tendering process. We'd be delighted to hear that.
Thank you very much for the question. We have had integrity measures for the procurement processes for some time, but the last set of changes that we made were in July 2012, where we added a set of infractions where a bidder would be considered ineligible to do business with Public Works following a conviction. I can give you a sense of what some of those offences would be. So if they're found to be convicted of fraud against the government, frauds under the Financial Administration Act, payment of a contingency fee to a person to whom the Lobbying Act applies. There's a fairly extensive list of convictions that would render you ineligible to bid. The other element that we will render ineligible is if you are found to be in collusion. So if the Competition Bureau has found you to be in collusion or found you, but has given you a leniency provision, we will not consider the leniency provision. So you will also be banned from or prevented from bidding and or contracting with us. We also have the provisions to terminate a contract or a real property transaction if in the course of a contract the company or its board of directors have been found to or have been convicted of one of these offences. So it's not just prior to signing the contract, but it's also during the duration. There is no dollar threshold to this. This applies to every contract that that is signed with Public Works. Now, it does apply to procurements under the aegis of Public Works and Government Services Canada. It doesn't apply to other departments who have the authority to procure. So we are now signing a memorandum of understanding with other departments who wish to use the provisions of our integrity framework and who wish to use our validation and certification processes.
Thank you very much. How many firms have been excluded since July of 2012 from bidding on contracts as a result of these more robust provisions?
Mr. Chair, what we do not do is count the ones that have potentially not applied. And in fact, what we have received is a number of letters from companies that have indicated that they have not applied to us because they knew that the provisions, once applied, would render them ineligible. What I can say is that we have, in certain instances, found, I would say, about a dozen companies when we were about to sign the contract that they wouldn't be non-compliant.
One particular supplier of management consulting services to the Government of Canada is a company by the name of Accenture, which you are aware is it's a derivative of Arthur Andersen, which of course was involved in the Enron scandal. Would you? It would be, I think, fair to say that this Accenture was very directly related to Arthur Andersen and Andersen Consulting. Would you be able to describe to the committee the current portfolio of management consulting contracts that Accenture would currently have with the Government of Canada?
I think, Mr. Chair, we would have to get back to you with that information, and we would be in a position to do that for the data for which we hold the information, which is what Public Works would have. It
would probably be in the tens of millions, though?
I really would not want to venture a guess at this point because consultancy contracts and expenditures vary quite significantly from year to year.
Thank you.
But we can, at the request of the committee, we can do that.
Transmettre par l'entremise du greffier.
So you could provide this through the clerk, who will then distribute the information to committee members.
There is a circumstance that seems to be evolving that a number of contracts, some important contracts, are going to single bidders. Arup Engineering has already received a $15.2 million contract. I understand there were no bidders other than this particular engineering firm for this project. They have no particular history in dealing with Transport Canada. They're a UK-based company with some, I think, a very small office in Toronto. More recently, IBI Group has received a $1.1 million contract for electronic tolling. Does this cause concern for value for money for Canadian taxpayers? That there is a potential here that that contracts for a very major project are going to one bidder, and while the $15 million mark and $1.1 million mark may be relatively small considering the total size of this project, it does allow both of these companies now to be grandfathered in for future contracts, which now may be sole sourced. Could you give the committee some description of how this tendering process occurred and whether or not you have any concerns about value for money for taxpayers as a result?
Thank you for the question. With regard to the first contract that was mentioned for Arup, it was in fact a sole source contract that was accorded to the company. It was part of a subcontract that had been competitively won by PricewaterhouseCoopers to help in the definition of the design and engineering elements. Given the time compression that we have to undertake at this point for the procurement of the construction company for the Champlain Bridge, and given the background and the work done to date by this company, we did issue a sole source contract to Arup. Arup is not going to be able to bid or be part of any consortium for the request for proposals for the public-private partnership construction of the bridge. So this was a means for us to accelerate the work and in order to be able to give, in fact, a potential consortia, when we put out the request for proposals, a sense of what the requirements are, because this is a fairly technical request for proposals that would be going out, and this company is helping us define what those elements will be. With regard to the second contract that you mentioned, it was in fact competitively attributed. So there was a competition, and IBI Group won the competition. So there have been a series of contracts that have been issued for the bridge. The only one that is a sole source one was the one that was attributed to Arup.
Merci. Le temps est écoulé, M. Byrne. Donc,
Time is up, Mr. Byrne. Mr. Aspin, now for 5 minutes, please.
And, welcome, Madame Doré and your officials, and thank you for assisting us with this examination of supplementary estimates B. I have a few technical questions, and maybe I could begin by zeroing in on the department's supplementary estimates reference funding for a accommodation cost related to the pension administration project. And it's my understanding that that the transformation of pension administration project has been recognized with a prestigious awards, or prestigious awards plural, and has been recognized as being a tremendous achievement. So could you possibly elaborate on why this funding was necessary, and can you please shed some light on why the transformation of pension administration project has been deemed such a success?
Thank you for the question. The amount requested in supplementary estimates of $5.7 million is to provide office space for the pension administration. Now that it has been consolidated, and this amount is listed as separately because it will in fact be charged to the superannuation account and the pension fund. So it is a chargeable amount. It is not so that we're provided with the amount, and then we charge it back to the funds. The pension project itself was another large information technology project in which to replace yet another 40-year-old IT system for which there was no longer any technical support or capacity. And the cost or the investment that was required was about $260 million. And starting in 16-17, the savings will be about $29 million a year that will be generated as a result of that. The reason why this system or this project is garnering so many prizes is that, as I was mentioning in my remarks, this is a service in a system that supports almost 600,000 users. It is the biggest of its kind in Canada. The pension project was not just to develop and rebase the system, but also to turn it into a paperless system. So all of the transactions are done electronically. It has a very extensive web-based user system, so people actually access their services and their information directly from the web. Yes, there are some pension advisors and there is a call center with a 1-800 number that people can call, but it is a very simple to use, but at the same time very sophisticated system that will give people their information and accelerate the processing of the requests for pensions. One of the other members of the committee asked about the deposits. Again, these are done as direct deposits. There's no paper transaction, so it's all electronic. In fact, it has turned into a model that other countries are looking at. What we have done as a result of this, and now we're going into different phases for the pension. It went live in January 2013, and we are now applying the same rigor to transform the RCMP's pension system and add it onto the platform. As well, the next phase after that will be to bring on the Canadian Forces pension system onto the same platform. What we have done, and my colleagues who are winning all these prizes will say that what they developed is the religion of on scope, on time, on budget. They call it a religion because they inculcate it in all of their employees. And in fact, we now have a hard time keeping those employees because they are superb project managers. They have now got the religion, so to speak, and they're being used in different projects in IT transformation projects across the government.
On scope, on time, on budget. Good news indeed. Congratulations. Do I have any further time, Mr. Chair?
15 seconds.
Okay, well, I'll relinquish those seconds. Thank you.
Merci. Alors, le prochain sur ma liste est M. Martin.
The next person on my list is Mr. Martin for 5 minutes.
Departmental report of this portfolio just reminds us what a staggering scope and magnitude of activity there is there, and as one of the oversight committees of Parliament that is supposed to provide scrutiny and oversight, it's almost impossible in this amount of time to do justice to the amount of activity that's been presented to us today. The best we can do is pick narrow little subjects and drill down a little bit in those. So, well, I appreciate the task that you have, Madame Doré. Again, we simply can't do it justice, I don't think, in this limited amount of time. I'm going to use what little time I have to ask specifically about some of the contracts that go through Public Works, specifically the advertising contracts on behalf of other departments. My information is the entire federal government's advertising budget last year was about $65 million. Minister Oliver wants $40 million this year alone to promote the oil and gas industry. I'm wondering if there's any criteria or limitations imposed on you as to what nature of advertising the government is allowed to buy. First of all, I've always understood that government advertising is to inform Canadians of the services government has to offer, to make sure that they're aware of what their entitlements and the services, etc., not to promote one particular industry sector. And not even in Canada, but I understand he wants to spend this money advertising abroad, in Europe and the United States. Now, nobody has to do any tag day sales for the oil and gas industry. I mean, second to the big banks, they're about the wealthiest corporations in the country, if not the world. So when you're put in the position of purchasing these advertising blocks, is there any screen that you use to push back and say, why are we promoting the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers with taxpayers' money? Are you Do you have any obligation or responsibility as Public Works to that effect?
Thank you for the question. The responsibility of Public Works is to manage the procurement of the advertising agency and the placement of the media at the request and according to the media plan of the department or organization. The funds, as the member indicated, are actually allocated to each department, and it is up to each department to manage the content according to the government's communications policy. So in terms of any specific questions with regard to the content of the ads and the communications aspects, those would be best directed to the responsible department.
But can you verify, to your knowledge, are these figures accurate, that the $12.9 million that Mr. Oliver is asking for, the supplementary estimates B, will be added to, I believe, $26 million that he's already spending promoting the oil and gas industry, for a total of $40 million. Would you be able to answer then, would this $40 million be above and beyond? I mean, last year they spent $237,000 total. This year it's $40 million. Will that be added to the government's total of $65 million in advertising that they spend across the board?
I think, Mr. Chair, we would have to get back to you on that, because my understanding is that the total Government of Canada advertising centrally funded is $65 million.
That's my information.
The departments, however, can also allocate from within their own funding. So again, that question should be directed to the Department of Natural Resources.
Okay, I'm going to leave that, and with the last minute I have, go to a very narrow question. The direct deposit program, I presume, is an efficiency undertaking to save money and streamline direct deposit, whether it's pensions or paychecks. And I understand by 2016 this program will be complete. Does that mean that no one will get a paper check in the mail anymore, period? I raise this because I've had seniors come to me with that concern, that they're not comfortable with or prepared to endorse the idea that all communication of money from the government will be electronic.
Thanks for the question. The goal is, in fact, to get as close to 100% as possible, recognizing that in some instances there are some people, and this is to direct deposit in bank accounts. So if you do not have a bank account, if you do not have access to a financial institution, there are some provisions for the government to be able to provide you with the money in a check form. However, we have found, and it has in fact been demonstrated, that direct deposit and electronic transfers to banks are actually more secure than paper checks that can be endorsed using different means of identification. We have in fact found that the take-up among seniors is among the most significant of all of our users. In fact, the challenge that we have for direct deposit is with small business. It's not with seniors.
Merci pour ces questions et réponses. Monsieur Van Kesteren.
Thank you for those questions and answers. Mr. Van Kesteren, for 5 minutes as well, please.
For coming here. I'm one of the newbies. I think there's a lot of newbies here, and so we're just gathering information, trying to understand. In a former life, and we still own it, we own a car dealership. And they used to call the dealer principals, I guess I was a dealer principal, they used to call us three-figure Charlies, because we would zoom into the assets, the liabilities, and the profit loss. So those are the only three figures that we were really interested in. I'm somewhat surprised, and maybe I'm missing this. But and if I could just segue for a second in relationship to that, maybe I can answer Mr. Martin's question too. Advertising is a form of promotion. I think if I'm not looking for, but I think that's probably why the government does it. I think we used to, if my memory serves me correct, we'd advertise about 6% of gross sales. So if gross sales were $10 million, 120, sizable. So I guess to that degree, if you look at what the federal government is spending, it's far, far less than that. And if it is a form of promotion, then oils and sands are 20% of GDP. It makes sense that we would spend that kind of money on the oil and sands, or pardon me, the oil and gas industry. My question is, my first question, do you have, or does the federal government have, a spreadsheet much the same that would list assets and liabilities? I mean, obviously we take in a sizable amount of money, we spend a lot of money, but do we have a figure? What's the Fed's worth? What's the federal government worth?
Thank you for the question. We have the public accounts is actually the closest that we have in presenting, as you call it, the total balance sheet. However, we do not put, we put a dollar figure on the expenditures, obviously the revenues and the liabilities. In terms of the assets, we do not put a dollar figure on the assets because we self-insure. So that even if an asset had a certain value, we put a dollar figure if we're about to sell the asset, but not to put it into the value of the books of Canada. Because if we did, we would actually have to measure every single asset that we have, put a market value to it, and some of it is irreplaceable. So at some point, you look at your liabilities and you look at the assets if you sell them.
Okay, so from what I understand, these buildings, and we had a wonderful tour with Mr. Chawan last week of what we're doing, and so we never tag what the building's worth. It's just never done?
We do not put a book value on the assets held by the government except for very specific accounting purposes.
Stuff like
Sorry?
that. What about Crown land, things like that?
Unless we are about to divest ourselves of Crown lands, Mr. Chair, we do not put a value. We have done, the closest we have come is when we have to assess all of the liabilities. So we have done, for example, a full assessment of the liabilities for contaminated lands or buildings. We did undertake an initiative a few years back of undertaking exactly as you suggest to do a valuation of all of the assets held by the Government of Canada. We looked at the cost-benefit of doing that, and we found that it was going to take us probably about 30 years to do it, and the cost of doing it would far outweigh, to a certain extent, the benefit, because the physical assets, if something happens to them and we need them, we replace them, and it's just virtually impossible to put a dollar value on them.
So the short answer, how much time do I have, Chair?
1 minute.
1 minute. Short answer, we have no idea what the Feds are worth.
Well,
no idea.
No. The short answer is
interesting.
At some point, and I'll stop there.
Okay, I got two other questions. The first is in relation to pensions, because when we were looking at our spreadsheet last week, we discovered, and I think most of us knew that the federal government had a debt of about $640 billion. But tagged to that were liabilities for pensions. And I guess we ran out of time. I didn't get an answer for this. Does that mean that the money is not set aside for public pensions? We obviously, from what I understand, the employee gives a portion and the employer takes a portion, or actually contributes a portion. Is that money not put somewhere, or is that just a balance for, again, assets and liabilities? It's sitting there, but it's a liability because it has to be paid.
Mr. Chair, there are some instances, and this goes back to my previous incarnation as the Secretary to the Treasury Board, not in this current function. But I can give you an answer, but the specific answer would actually be coming from the Treasury Board Secretariat. After 2000, both the amounts to pay, the sources of funds as well as the liabilities were put in the Public Sector Pension Investment Board. Prior to that, the liabilities and the payments are, as you suggest, the payments went into the General Revenue Fund, and the contributions went into the Consolidated Revenue Fund, and the expectation of the payments out are also from the fiscal framework. After 2000, actually the regime was established with the Public Pension Investment Board, much like the Canada Pension Investment Board, and so the monies in and the monies out are now accounted for with the board.
Merci. Non, il y a plus de temps. Alors, on passe Madame Day pour 5 minutes.
Thank you. We move on to Ms. Day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to pursue Along the same lines as Mr. Kestren's questions, a citizen complained in September about the advertising based on the standards we have in Canada, and it was Stephen Harper's announcements pertaining to a decision on the Economic Action Plan, and $15,000 could be made available, $5,000 for the province, $5,000 from the Government of Canada, and $5,000 from the company itself, the business. We know that the government was found to be at fault, and this was withdrawn from the program. Could you tell us how much this advertising cost? Mr. Chairman, I'll have to come back to you because we will have to check into the numbers and get these numbers for you. Economic Development Canada will have to delve into this. The former Human Resources Skills Development Department. Yes, if you could provide that through the clerk yet again. Perhaps you could put questions to our witnesses that pertain to their department. If you want information pertaining to other departments, we'll have to seek out this information because it doesn't fall under us. Second question, given that this program, its implementation requires consultation with the provinces and representatives of staff, could you tell us if this is available, if it's underway, or if it's being developed, and in the budget, is it there? Once again, Mr. Chairman, I'll have to ask you to put the question to Employment and Social Development. There again, I forget the new name of the department, but it doesn't fall under me. I'm not responsible for that, so I'll ask you to put the question directly to the department. Thank you for that clarification. Yet again, I would ask you to ensure that your questions relate to Public Works and Government Services Canada. In Public Works expenses, we've been provided with numbers. Out of the 9 programs that are involved here, you're looking for increases in 2013-2014 for 5 of these 9 programs. I could list them for you, but I think you know what they are, and decreases as of 2014-2015. We know it's going to be an election year. What justifies the increases now and the decreases the following year? Mr. Chairman, which programs are involved here? Yes, I could give them to you. Accommodation and Real Property, Receiver General of Canada, Federal Pay and Pension Administration, Linguistic Management and Services, and the 5th is the Ombudsman, Procurement Ombudsman. Thank you for this information. With regard to the fluctuations for the accommodations, I would say that it's also a matter of fluctuations, because year to year there will be reductions, increases, depending. There's the inflation rate, leases that increase, etc. We also have reductions that are planned for based on the savings that we must realize, and they're worth about $240 million, with the total amount of these reductions applying as of 2015, 16, 17. So this also means that we, and Mr. Mongeau mentioned this earlier, we must consolidate departments. This involves reducing our footage that's occupied, so there'll be sensitive reductions in that area as well. With regard to pay administration, we discussed this earlier. There's going to be an increase, but then it will drop off because the implementation project will end in the following years. For the Receiver General, the reduction is attributable to the direct deposit program, with savings there too. With regard to linguistic management, there was a reduction because it was the end of a temporary program that we did not renew, and we're also planning on gradually changing its model, its operational model. For the Ombudsman, it's just a matter of predictions based on the stability of the amounts involved. So there's not really an impact there with regard to what we're predicting over time for stability. And in the end, if the amounts don't increase, there'll be a proportional decrease. Your time is up. Ms. Blonsky, for 5 minutes as well, please.
I want to get back to the program to use the procurement of the federal government to support and encourage small businesses. This is something we've been talking about for a long time. And one of the things we noticed is that the same suppliers always got the contracts, and there was never any effort to include new and exciting and startup businesses. And so I'm just delighted that this is happening. However, as in most things, there's a bit of a moral hazard built into this, in the sense that companies can become complacent or dependent, or not feeling that they really have to adhere to world-class standards because, you know, the government is going to nurse them along a little bit. So I know you probably had a lot of anxious discussion about where the right balance is. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about your observations and how you intend to manage the process so that it helps but doesn't enable a lack of excellence.
Thank you for the question. The specific program of building innovation in Canada is actually designed to give companies that first leg up into a contract with the Government of Canada, and we have and will be adding a new component to it, which is the military procurement component, in order to be able to give companies that opportunity. It is not meant to be a recurring, and this is the neat thing about this particular program. It is not meant to be a recurring procurement. It is a one-time procurement for an innovation or a product or a service. It is to be able then to demonstrate that the use of that, it has to serve a need. So it has to be able to respond to a specific need of a government department or an agency. So for example, there was in fact a procurement recently with Fisheries and Oceans for a kind of a sonar for its boats for the Coast Guard, actually, for fisheries monitoring. And once demonstrated its use, it can in fact be used as a proof of the concept and can then be resold to other countries or to other organizations who have similar needs. So it is in fact a very neat program that gives that opportunity for new companies or for companies with new products. It's not just a new company, but it also is for companies with new products or new innovations or services. With regard to the ability of companies to compete and to vary the base of suppliers from which we choose, this is where the work of the Office of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise is critical, because not every organization, not every company actually understands the requirements of competing and selling to the Government of Canada. And while we do recognize that it is a complex process, it is one that we have established in order to ensure the integrity and the fairness of the process. So we have found that through OSME and its outreach activities, it is very much web-based, face-to-face. It actually has a fairly significant outreach program. Companies are gaining a better understanding and are in fact applying and competing in situations where they would not necessarily have thought to offer their services or goods to the Government of Canada. Now, it's not something that gets solved overnight. OSME has been in operation, Pablo,
since 2005.
So it is progressively encouraging and reaching out to companies and facilitating their interaction with the government.
Can you give us some idea of the take-up?
In terms of small business, so of non-military sales, so all other procurement, 70 to 75% of procurement goes to SMEs, to small, medium-sized enterprises. So there's good uptake, and in the military area, it tends to be a bit smaller. It's in the neighborhood of 40% of small, medium-sized enterprise do business with us. I don't have the figures with me right now, but we do have a turnover of new companies. And I would just say in the smart procurement approach, which is that early industry engagement, that is the key piece to finding new service providers, new goods providers, is to engage with industry early about our requirements. One of the roles that we play as Public Works is that when a client department comes up with a requirement, they need something, we challenge the requirement, because what we don't want is a requirement that specifies the result. We want a requirement that specifies what their need is. So you can tell me that you need a red Chevrolet with 4 wheels and they have to be winter tires, and I'll say, what do you need it for? And it's to drive. Well, that means I can procure a car, and so with limits on it. So that's kind of the challenge in a simple way. That is exactly what we do with each procurement. And so the early engagement is with industry and with our client departments, so that it opens up the playing field for new opportunities for new businesses to come up with new ideas on how to approach services.
Merci. Le temps est écoulé, Madame.
Thank you. Your time is up now. I now give the floor to Mr. Brenner for 5 minutes.
I want to follow up again on the issues of integrity measures and the public procurement. Deputy Minister, I think we can both agree that there are some constraints to this process that should be identified to prevent a sort of a false sense of security. Some of those constraints would be that convictions actually have to be against contractors that were engaged in contracts with the Federal Civil Service. Would that be correct, as opposed to contracts with other private sector relationships with other private sector companies? They would actually have to have been convicted in a criminal court for a previous past dealing with the federal government. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, no, that is not correct. It's a list of infractions, some of which are against the government, but some of them are participation in activities of criminal organizations, income and excise tax evasion, offences in relation to drug trafficking. So I didn't read through all of the list of infractions and convictions, but they are not just about prior business with the Government of Canada.
One of the things in the example that I used of Accenture, I don't think it's a stretch by any stretch, by anyone's imagination. There was some big trouble there that came down with Accenture and the whole Enron scandal, and Arthur Andersen. Accenture is basically flowed from Arthur Andersen as a company that basically reinvented itself and just simply reincorporated himself. And now Accenture has some significant dealings with the Government of Canada. Does the rules reflect that reality, that sometimes that companies can just simply, companies that are convicted with principal officers that are criminally charged and convicted can sometimes just simply reinvent themselves through renewed incorporations?
There are 2 elements, Mr. Chair, that I would address. One of the elements is that if a company has been convicted in another country, the conviction in another country does not apply in Canada. So that's one aspect of the question. If the company and its affiliates or its directors, even if the directors find themselves on another board, and if the directors have been convicted, we actually exclude them on the basis of that conviction. So the directors are also, it's not just the company, but it's also the directors of the company.
Understand. Thank you very much for that information. On the flip side of it, companies can also sue, take legal action against the federal government. Accenture is a company that's known to be very aggressive about that. In addition to providing this committee with a portfolio of contracts that it has awarded to it, knowing its own past, would you also be able to provide the committee with a description and a portfolio, as it were, if I need further description for you for that, of how many times Accenture has actually engaged in either legal action against the federal government for not fulfilling, for, as it felt, did not fulfill its contractual obligations, or had received an out-of-court settlement from the federal government?
Mr. Chair, I would have to be able to check back to see if we can actually find that information. It may be a matter in some instances of public record, in some instances it may not be. So it is a question for us. If, with your permission, we would look into it and get back to the clerk of the committee.
It would be fair that since it's a single company that I'm referring to and that it's well known to the federal government that it may not be very difficult to do that research. Would that be fair to say?
I would prefer to say that we will look into it and get back to the committee clerk if that is okay with the chair.
Oui, si possible, encadrer les questions plus possible.
Once again, if you could direct your questions in the context of the study of the supplementary estimates B, if you could limit yourself to that, perhaps our witnesses would be able to respond.
I do note, however, that the witnesses actually raised in their presentation to us, and I will quote from the Deputy Minister, Public Works Government Service, that in everything we do, we put a great importance on integrity. In July of 2012, the Department introduced new integrity measures which render potential bidders ineligible if they have been convicted of certain offences. I think it would be fair to Mr. Chair for you to acknowledge that since it is the witnesses who raise the issue of integrity of contracting process, it would not be inappropriate in the least to raise that issue here at the committee with the witnesses in my exchange.
Pas de problème. Si dans la mesure du possible.
If answers can be provided, fine, but if not, we will ask for answers later on, provided through the clerk.
Federal Ombudsman of Procurement. Would you be able to describe to the committee just basically the relationship that Public Works Government Services has with the Ombudsman and the value that it provides to the contracting process?
The Ombudsman, Mr. Chair, is a separate entity. It reports, the office reports directly to the Minister of Public Works and Government Services Canada. It has the mandate to assess and to address complaints that it receives for procurements under $25,000 or below the range of the trade limits, which I believe is $76,000. And the complainants, it also receives complaints for procurements that are beyond that. So the Ombudsman refers those complaints to us. He or his office cannot address those. But the others, if they receive complaints about a procurement process that relates to Public Works, they also receive complaints about procurement processes that relate to other organizations that have procurement authorities. I would have to look at, or I would encourage you, if I could put it this way, to look at his annual report, which was just recently released, and you will get in there all of the information about the number of cases and the number of complaints and the assessments. But he doesn't work, if I can put it this way, with us. He has a very specific mandate to inform potential suppliers to the Government of Canada of what the recourse mechanisms are through his office. And he refers complaints that he receives to us if he cannot address them. And then when he receives complaints for which he has the mandate, he undertakes a review of the complaints. When we receive complaints that he refers to us, for which he doesn't have the mandate to review, we actually take each one of them on its face value, and we undertake procurement reviews, and we get back directly to the complainant.
Merci pour les réponses. Donc, Monsieur O'Connor.
Thank you for these answers. Mr. O'Connor.
Yeah, thanks for coming today. I know we're running out of your time, but I've noticed that Revenue Canada brings in more than $250 billion a year, and yet you're called the Receiver General. Why isn't Revenue Canada called the Receiver General, since they bring in a lot more revenue than anybody else?
That's an interesting question, Mr. Chair. We are the organization through which the payments and receipts are processed. So we are the receiver in that sense, general, for all of the incoming and outgoing. So that is the name. Revenue Canada generates or collects the revenue, but we receive the revenue.
So we could call them receiver anyway. It's just a thing I've always wondered about it, because they seem to get all the money. The National Capital Region, there is some guidance or rule out there that says that in the National Capital Region, buildings or people have to be distributed in certain proportions. It might be 77-23 or something like that. And I'd like to know what the state of that distribution is at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. It is a policy and a commitment made by Public Works and Government Services Canada to ensure that in its office accommodation distribution within the National Capital Area, 25% would be in Gatineau and 75% on the Ottawa side. And I would turn perhaps to my colleague, Monsieur Mongeau, to be able to give us the current status. I think it's almost at 25-75 right now.
On est toujours un peu en train de...
We are always juggling with this. We aim for 25-75, but sometimes we'll be at 74.9 or 75.2. It varies, but we're always doing our best to follow this model. Coming back to the initial question that was put, the fact that we also were able to build the 3 buildings on the Gatineau side will also allow us to reinforce that apportioning 75-25. So we do respect this, and every year we do a follow-up on these percentages.
To do with life cycle costs. Life cycle costs for projects. What's involved in a life cycle cost?
Mr. Chair, the concept between life cycle costing or through life cycle actually goes from the beginning of the acquisition of an asset to for example, the planning, the procurement, the actual cost of the asset, the maintenance, the operations, and all the way through to its disposition. So that is what is called a through life cycle. So it covers the costs of an asset from the planning to purchase it to the final disposition of the asset. So it covers, depending on the type of the asset, it could cover 25 years, 30 years, 10 years. It has to cover all of the aspects of it.
But how do you calculate that? I mean, especially, let's take a defense project, a large defense project, which apparently now we have to calculate for 40 years. How do you calculate for 40 years?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, what we do is we look at, not every asset has a 40-year lifetime, but we do look at what comparables would be. If we have an asset or an equipment that is similar, we will look at what are the costs of personnel, training, maintenance over time, and we will project those over a time frame. These are essentially, as you have put them, they're estimates of through life cycle, and those estimates get refined on an annual basis once the asset is acquired and addressed. Now, we have found that some assets can in fact go much beyond their original expected life duration, but then the maintenance costs will go up significantly. So they're adjusted as and through the life of the asset. But when you are about to make a purchase, it is good practice, and that is done in all enterprises when you're making significant asset purchases, to look at what your expected cost over the duration of the use of that asset would be. You need that in order to be able to plan for budgeting and planning purposes.
Do I have time left?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. I just think it's very difficult to try to imagine inflation 10, 20 years out, because you have to be off your mark by quite a distance eventually.
We always do this we use ranges, Mr. Chair. So it is always, there is always an element of projection, and whenever we use a number that goes out for more than 5 years, all of the usual caveats around the ranges, the expectations, what could happen in a case of some major activity or break. So it's just, again, it's to give you, from an operational perspective, a range of what the cost of having and maintaining that asset would be over the expected life of the asset. It really is a planning tool. It's not specifically a budgeting tool, but it is a planning tool when you're trying to do financial projections over a long time cycle.
Merci. Donc, pour conclure,
Thank you. And to conclude, I give the floor to the inestimable Mr. Blanchet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don't insist too much on that. With regard to the linguistic management program, management and services, it rose progressively over time, 2011, 2012, and over the course of 2 years, it drops by close to 28%. What's going on here? There are two aspects. First of all, Mr. Chairman, we had programs that were used by the Translation Bureau. These were temporary programs. So these temporary programs had a duration of 5 years, and when the programs wound down, they were not renewed. The temporary program that just ended? Do you have an example of a temporary program that just ended? Mr. Chairman, there was a program in support of colleges and universities for the training of translators and interpreters. This is a program that had a lifespan of 5 years. The monies were spent, the programs were set up, and at the end of the 5-year period, the program had reached its objectives and was not renewed. That's an example of such a program. There also was a decrease in the use of the Translation Bureau, with a reduction, very simply, in the number of words, and it fluctuates year to year, the number of documents translated or the number of interpretation assignments, because our interpretation services, on top of those used here in the parliamentary precinct, are used for activities, conferences, very precise activities. So there again, there are fluctuations, and there's a reduction, a drop that we've seen in travel. People use video conferencing more and more. So the idea of having people move about, meetings being held elsewhere with physical interpretation services, well, that has dropped. And this represents a quarter of the operational budget, what you've just described. The fluctuations can indeed have that impact, yes. Different subject now. Mr. Cannon opened the door for me earlier. The shipyards. The Auditor General congratulated us for the process, saying that everything was going well overall. And you said during your presentation that you are more and more proactive in this area, interacting with the private sector for consultation purposes, etc. And you discussed inflation issues with Mr. O'Connor. But in the context of the purchase of military ships, warships, we saw something major left by the wayside. Inflation in the construction of military battleships, military infrastructure, is much higher than the inflation that we endure daily. Clearly, the Canadian government will have to make a choice at some point in time. How many ships will it order to be built, etc. And my question isn't at that level, because the government has responded. My question is more with regard to the process. What are you going to do in order to not let details of that importance slip away, because it's going to be very, very costly? If I understand your question, in the case of the budgets that were established, and the Auditor General did mention this in his report, he recognized that the budgets are mechanisms that are useful to establish levels, to bring some discipline to the choice of the needs, the tools, the various elements involved in the construction, in the shipbuilding proper. So this provides for discipline and rigor in the choice, in the way in which these ships are built. And for some ships, we are now moving into the design phase, because those who have shipbuilding experience, ships of a certain size, and we did consult our American, British colleagues, etc. in this area, what they tell us every time is that we must ensure that the design was done taking into account all those essential elements, at which time you'll have a better idea of the costs and of the way to go about building the ships. So this is what we undertake, and this is what the Auditor General told us. Once you've finished that, even if inflation comes into play, because we mustn't forget that the cost of materials fluctuates. Some years, indeed, I know this because I remember when I was at Fisheries and Oceans at the time, the cost of steel went through the roof. And 2 years later, it dropped off again. It goes up and down. So it's important for us to have the design that's as complete as possible, as comprehensive as possible, in order to determine these elements and in order for shipyards to determine the precise cost of these ships. Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. You've run out of time. I take advantage of this opportunity to thank our witnesses from Public Works and Government Services who have been here with us today to outline for us their programs and answer our questions. So thank you and have a good evening. Given your funding activity for the holiday season, so we'll suspend for a few minutes and we will then come back.